Hey everybody, I wanted to give you a quick video, little mini lecture on the editing and proofreading checklist that I have prepared for the class. And I also want to show you an interesting article that talks about the logical fallacy post hoc ergo propter hoc. We didn't get a chance to talk about it in class on Monday, but it's an interesting one. It's the correlation does not equal causation. So just because something happens before something else doesn't mean what happened before was the cause of what happened next, right? So say that I got into a car accident, minor fender bender, and then, the next day I fail my test, my math test. Just because the car accident happened sequence in time before the test doesn't mean it made me fail the test, right? So we're going to look at how people tend to interpret evidence and make possible connections to the evidence. Actually, let's go ahead and start with that now. So the article that I wanted to show you was this fantastic one. It's by Dr. Eric Siegel, and he's a data analyst, and his article is 9 Bizarre and Surprising Insights from Data Science. And what's curiously interesting about this is that, this is a blog post. So as you're looking at this, consider the format, and you have a link to this in your announcements, right? So he says, data is the world's most potent, flourishing, unnatural resource. Accumulated in large part as byproduct of routine tasks, it's the unsalted, flavorless residue deposited en masse as organizations churn away. Well, surprise! The heap of refuse is inherently predictive, that some pieces of data can predict others, and often they don't know why there's a relationship. You can make guesses about that relationship, and we often do that academically. But what's really important for you as the writer and as you're finalizing your own blog posts is to think about when it's okay to make these predictive logical leaps, and how they can be supported, and then sometimes when you have to be careful about the connections you're making. Okay, so that it's not just a correlation does not equal causation, right? So I wanted to show you some interesting examples, and look at these. Here's one. The insight is that Pop-Tarts, the issue is Pop-Tarts before hurricane. So pre-hurricane, strawberry Pop-Tart sales increased 7-fold. What organization would this affect? Walmart, for example, or Target. Suggested explanation is, how do we unpack the pieces of data? There's two different pieces of data. You've got a hurricane coming and you've got sales of Pop-Tarts, right? And so a suggested explanation is, in prep before an act of nature, people stock up on comfort or non-perishable foods. I mean, that seems reasonable. That's a leap, right? Here's another one. High crime, more Uber rides. In San Francisco, the areas with the most prostitution, alcohol, theft, and burglary are most positively correlated with Uber trips. Interesting, right? So the hypothesis, the logical guess is that crime should be a proxy for a non-residential population. Uber riders are not causing more crime, right? Maybe. This one I find hilarious. Typing with proper capitalization indicates credit worthiness. For those of you that are working on your capitalization issues. Online loan applicants that complete the application form with the correct case are more dependable debtors. Those who complete the form with lowercase letters are slightly less reliable payers. All capitals reveals even less reliability. Wow, right? So a financial services startup company, that would apply to them, right? Adherence to grammatical rules reflects a general propensity to correctly comply with rules, with regulations, and with the deadlines. Think about that. So here's another one. Users of Chrome and Firefox browsers may make better employees. Among hourly employees engaged in frontline service and sales-based positions, those who use these two custom web browsers perform better on employment assessment metrics and stay on longer. Now, if you're in HR for like a big firm, and the potential leap here is that the fact that you took time to install a different browser means that you're an informed consumer, that you know the differences between browsers and you know the weaknesses of Internet Edge or Internet Explorer, for example, and that you care and you make active choices. Here's another one. Men who skip breakfast get more coronary heart disease. American men 45 to 82 who skipped breakfast showed a 27% higher risk of coronary heart disease over a 16-year period. And that's would apply to like the Harvard University medical researchers. Besides the direct health effects, if any, breakfast may be a proxy for your lifestyle. So, for example, those people who skip breakfast probably have more stressful lives, and we're more likely to be smokers, to work full time, to be unmarried, to be less physically active, and then drink more alcohol. Okay, so the last one I think I'll show you is this one. Female named hurricanes are more deadly. Based on a study of the most damaging hurricanes in the United States during 6 recent decades, so 60 years, the ones with relatively feminine names killed an average of 42 people, almost 3 times the 15 killed by hurricanes with relatively male names. Just university researchers. And so this may result, look at that word, that's an important word, it may result from a hazardous form of implicit sexism. Sounds crazy, right? But the reality is that it's possible, you need that qualifier, that suggested that this is because feminine versus masculine named hurricanes are perceived as less risky, and people are less motivated to prepare. But think Hurricane Katrina, right? Individuals systematically underestimate the vulnerability to hurricanes with feminine names. Now, before we go to the end of this, think about how easily you accepted the rationale in italic in that third column. How easily you're like, you know what, that makes sense. That seems logical, right? That there's some sort of relationship between strawberry Pop-Tart sales and hurricanes. Okay, but what Dr. Siegel says is a word of warning in the examples above. Don't give much credence to the suggested explanation column's attempt to answer why. For each one, there are also other plausible explanations, and in most cases, only intuition, like your gut instinct, right? Rather than actual scientific evidence behind the particular answer was provided. The reasons behind each discovery in the column are unknown. You know, the reasons why there's a relationship, they don't know yet. They're making guesses, conjecture, okay? And there are no facts to say that without, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that this is why. I mean, some of it seemed pretty reasonable, but it wasn't proof yet, at least scientifically. So the dilemma ends up being correlation does not equal causation. That's one of those logical fallacies that you have to make sure that in your blog posts, if you're talking about fake news and then people being dumbed down, especially we're talking about the future, think about how you phrase those arguments. Think about how you structure them, and think about the fact that there could be more than one cause for people to believe in the first things that they read. What's interesting is for people in predictive analytics like Dr. Siegel, it doesn't often matter why there's a relationship. As long as there's a relationship, they can inform parent companies about how to market content, or they can inform pharmaceutical companies about how to encourage physicians to test drive some of these new medications based on these interesting, weirdly connected things. Things is a bad word. These really connected points. The last one is if you have a higher status, you're often less polite, right? And they use Wikipedia editors as the sample for that. So think about the correlation does not always equal causation. Just because something happened before something else doesn't mean it's the cause, right? And think about how logically you're going to argue, and often this means advanced research. Okay, so that's part number 1. And the other part I want to show you is pay attention also to the editing and proofreading checklist for the week. Try to do these processes independently of one another. When you edit, think about how you're affecting meaning and how you're making sure you've said everything you need to say and that you're not repetitive, that you've got quality source work, and that you framed your discussion out with an introduction paragraph, with body paragraphs, with an effective conclusion. Think that you look for those working thesis statements in a plan of development. This because X, Y, and Z, your claims, right? Make sure your body paragraphs have clear topic sentences and the data and details directly relate to what you're arguing. A lot of times we have a lot of details, but we tend to go off topic. Be careful with vague word choices. You don't want to say things or stuff. They read a lot of things about, well, what did they read? Newspaper articles, blog posts, tweets. You can be more specific, and then you help guide your readers. Note that I'll be looking for sources named appropriately. First time, full name. If it's a person or you spell out an acronym, say it's George Mason University. So you say George Mason University the first time, and then right after it, you can do GMU in parentheses, and then just use GMU thereafter. If it's a person, after you say John Smith, throughout the rest of the blog, just say Smith. And definitely use Smith's name if you keep referring back to that person. Orient your readers at the top of body paragraphs, right? You could say Smith goes on to say, and then he. That's fine. Organizationally, you want your text to flow. You've got to move from point to point logically. If it's something structured in time, you go from past to present most often, right? If you're doing a point of emphasis, you can build up your evidence to have your strongest evidence last, or if you feel like you've got a hostile audience, you can use the strongest evidence first. These are the things you get to think about as you edit your blog post that maybe you didn't think about before, but will help you draw out your discussion. As far as proofreading goes, this is super important. You want to be trustworthy to your audiences, so please run the spell checker. And if you can't do it in Blogger, copy the text, paste it into Word, and then run the spell checker there. All right. You want effective sentences that have full thoughts, that aren't fragmented. Certainly read out loud. For comma placement, you don't want comma splices. That's when you have weak comma use and you need stronger punctuation there. Missing commas, adding that necessary pause. A small pause is a comma. With a comma splice, for example, you take the comma out and put like a semicolon, maybe make it 2 sentences. It just depends. Watch word choice. I just got an email from a student this week where they were defiantly going to study for their final exam, and I think they meant definitely. So watch that word choice. Spell check doesn't catch it all. Homonyms, two and two, your and your, or there and there. Those words that we tend to mix up just a little bit. Proper capitalization sets off titles, sets off full names or names of a company, right? Let's see what else. Title consistency. Big titles are in italic, like the name of a newspaper, the New York Times. But smaller titles, like an article within the New York Times, would just be in quotes. Trouble in America. You do proper capitalization and quotes around that. So the capitalization of titles, I've got some rules here. First words, last words, words after the colon. You know, like you have a title and subtitle, the nouns, verbs, pronoun. Sometimes it's easier to determine what you don't capitalize. Articles, conjunctions, and prepositions, unless they're first, last, or first word after a colon. Make sure you properly bear your hyperlinks, that you label all images and figures, right? That's a good one. We'll work on that in class, certainly on Monday. Font and style consistency, that you've got that blog block style. Look at the Eric Siegel, where he even had a table in there, but all of his paragraphs were flush left. It wasn't like an APA academic essay, right? That you're careful with your plural versus possessive, and that you also watch floating punctuation. That is, you make sure that your commas hug the right word or your quotes hug the right word. This list is not exhaustive. There's things that I've left off of this, but this is fine for now. What you'll want to do is focus on your weaknesses. If you're really good with plural and possessive, don't worry about it. That's not something you have to proofread for. But if you struggle with fragmented sentences, you've got to add that to your list. Print all of these out, work with them on the hard copy, and I wish you great luck. I'll see you on Monday.